Before instant game downloads took over, demo discs were a great way to try new games before buying them. And as a kid, they may have even been one of your biggest sources for information about new games, especially if you didn't know about gaming websites and message boards. Depending on the system, these demo discs were usually released every 1 to 3 months, either through magazines or store kiosks, and they featured playable demos and videos about recent and upcoming games. Every new disc felt like an event, and one of the most interesting aspects to me was that you could play multiple games on one disc. I've been thinking about how much content can fit on a single disc, and how even the best compilations probably don't reach their full potential. Games can take up wildly different amounts of space, and even though something like a Wii disc can hold 4.3 gigs, most games don't take up anywhere near that amount of space. So what's the most content that can fit on a single Gamecube disc? Specifically, what's the most good content? If you could only have one Gamecube disc with no other games, what should it include? First, we have to look at how the space should be optimized. A single Gamecube mini DVD can hold a little over 1.35 gigabytes, so we need to fit as much good content into this small amount of space as possible. We can shrink full Gamecube ISOs using Gamecube ISO tool, so they're small enough to fit together on a single disc. And the idea is that this disc can be played on an actual Gamecube, so the games need to be stored in a single Gamecube compatible ISO. We can make one of these using Gamecube Demo Disc tool. This is a program I wrote that lets you easily modify a Gamecube demo disc, allowing you to add or remove demos and change global disc settings. This tool isn't required for creating your own demo disc, but it does make it a lot easier. Many of the steps are automated for you, such as converting an ISO into the proper format, or converting normal images into textures that can be used in the disc menu. With all this in mind, we'll use the official preview disc as a base, and add full games to it as though they are demos to make this collection feel authentic. As for what we can put on this disc, we have one rule. Only content that was officially released on the Gamecube is allowed. That means no homebrew and no unlicensed games or apps. If homebrew were allowed, then we could just throw on some emulators and a bunch of ROMs, and that would make for a boring video. But even though we can't add this sort of content, we are allowed to remove content from existing games. For example, this is the opening video for Mario Kart Double Dash. It's a fun video and it sets the tone for what you're about to play, but it also takes up 72 megabytes. Not only is that a huge chunk of the game, but that's over 5% of the entire disc, for a 45-second video that you're probably going to skip every time you turn the game on. And then you have games with unused content such as 3D models or test videos, or art galleries that look nice but take up a ton of space. So now the question becomes not only what games take up the least space, but what games take up the least space after their unnecessary content is removed, which, depending on the game, can be anywhere between nothing and hundreds of megabytes. After very extensive testing, I think I've put together the ideal disc that fits plenty of great Gamecube games into about 1.35 gigabytes. Keep in mind that we're aiming for a strong quality to space ratio. If a certain important game isn't on this disc, it's probably because it takes up too much space, and not because I forgot about it. I'll talk about some of these honorable mentions near the end of the video. If we're going to make an official-looking compilation, we'll have to use something official as a base. We'll be using the preview disc. It's the Gamecube's most common and recognizable demo disc since it was the only one sold to the public. The contents of this disc, minus the demos and trailers, take up about 14 megabytes, plus around 200 kilobytes per game due to each game's highlighted logo, unhighlighted logo, and screenshots. The menu music takes up 9 megabytes and loops multiple times, so we'll cut down on space by replacing it with a version that doesn't loop. We could also remove the 3 meg opening video, but we'll keep it since it feels like an important part of the demo disc experience. With this change, the base menu for our compilation takes up a little over 6 meg. The first real game on this disc is the one I already mentioned, Mario Kart Double Dash. It needs no introduction, and it's a great addition to any Gamecube collection. It's also a good choice for Mario Kart since it has some gimmicks that never came back in later games. And even though this isn't my favorite game in the series, it's still one I come back to every once in a while. But just because this is number 1 on the list doesn't mean it's the best choice. In fact, it's one of the worst. Not because it's one of the worst games, but because it takes up almost 470 megabytes. Thankfully, we can remove the opening video I mentioned earlier to take off 72 meg. Just one short video takes up over 15% of the entire game. The end result is a little under 400 megabytes. This isn't ideal, and I wouldn't even consider adding most games at this size, but I'll make an exception since it's a Gamecube essential. It's also by far the biggest game on the entire disc, with only one other game coming close. Next up is Luigi's Mansion. The Gamecube was Nintendo's first home console in the US to not launch with a new Mario, but what we got instead was one of the system's most iconic games, with visuals that look almost as good as they did 19 years ago. It takes up almost 190 megabytes, but if you've played this game as much as I have, you may have already thought of an easy way to cut down on space. In the options menu, there's a Pikmin trailer that takes up 63 meg, or just over a third of the entire game. Take it out, and the game now only takes up 124 meg. For something so important to the system's library, this is a no-brainer. At number 3, we have Animal Crossing. You probably saw this one coming if you've ever backed up your GameCube collection. It's known for being the smallest full game on the entire system at only 26 megabytes. And it makes sense. Animal Crossing was originally an N64 game that was ported to the GameCube. It's so small that you can remove the disc after starting up the game and it'll still work fine because the full game is stored in RAM. This is another essential GameCube game anyway, and even more so than Double Dash, it's different enough from later games that still stands on its own today. And to make it even better, the first Animal Crossing also has about 20 unlockable NES games. Some of them can't be unlocked without a code generator, and 4 of the best ones can only be obtained through an Action Replayer e-reader, but they're still there. Next is The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures. This is an interesting one because at a glance, it makes sense why we'd want to include this. It's a game that uses sprites, and I don't think there's a single 3D model in the entire game. So why does it take up 255 megabytes? Did you see it? Yep, those are videos. The 2 menu options have videos playing on the side of the screen. If we remove them, the full game is only 45 meg. That's just over 3% of the entire disc, and the only price we pay is that there's a blinking box where the videos used to be. Number 5 is Mario Party 4. This is the only game that compares to Double Dash in size, but you may be surprised at how little space it takes up. And that's great for me since this is one of my favorite Mario parties. At first, it takes up 578 meg. As great as this game is, that's just not worth it, so we'll need to make it a lot smaller. The first option is to remove the game's opening. But it doesn't work. For some reason, completely removing the opening causes some glitches. The title screen keeps stuttering, and trying to load a save file softlocks the game. I don't know why this happens, but I was able to fix it by replacing it with a copy of the video that plays when loading a save file, which is basically just the first few seconds of the opening anyway. The second option is to remove the story mode endings. Each of the 8 playable characters has their own ending video that takes up about 30 meg. Removing these makes the story mode a little worse, but it also frees up a ton of space. There's also about 15 meg of unused models and textures, but removing them crashes the game if you try to enter the main party mode, so the videos are as far as we can go. The end result is about 267 meg. That's still a lot of space, but I think it's worth it. Next is WarioWare Inc. Mega Party Games. This game uses simple graphics that don't take up much space like 4 Swords Adventures, but also like Adventures, there are some videos bloating the original release. First, there are unlockable side videos we can remove that take up around half a gig in total. Second, there are 12 different videos that can play before the title screen chosen at random. Those take up another 218 meg. Finally, not only is the title screen itself a video, but it's actually 4 videos that play randomly. Instead of just animating the text itself, these videos waste another 60 meg. WarioWare would normally take up almost 850 megabytes, but once we remove the videos, the actual game is only 48 meg. We do want to be careful about what we remove though. In WarioWare's case, the bizarre videos that play when you turn the game on really prepare you for what you're about to play, but removing them doesn't really get in the way of the game, so it's not a big deal. At this point, we've gone through what I would say are all the obvious choices. Important games that either take up very little space or are important enough that their larger sizes are justified. So now we'll talk about some of the less obvious additions, and the first of these is Cubivore. It's not the most obscure GameCube game, especially since it's made some minor cameos in Smash, but it's definitely one of the most obscure and unique entries on this list. It was originally developed for the N64 disk drive, but moved over to the GameCube when the 64DD failed. In other words, Mother 3 didn't survive the 64DD, but this did. I don't know how to feel about that. But it's still a good game overall. It kept its N64 visuals, and because of that it only takes up 94 meg. It's not a must-have, but it's unique enough to be a good fit for this collection. Next is one of the few third-party games on this list, Crazy Taxi. It originated as an arcade game that was ported to Dreamcast and eventually made its way to Gamecube. It's a great arcade-style racing game, and the Dreamcast version doesn't take up much space, so maybe the Gamecube version will be the same. Sort of. It's still 136 meg, though we can make it better. The music alone takes up around 70 meg, but I really don't want to remove any of it if possible. There is one song we can change though. The menu theme is only a few seconds long, but for some reason, instead of looping normally, it's a 10-minute loop that takes up 32 meg. We can replace this with a copy of a shorter song that's already on the disc, which is, ironically, an extended version of the short loop. This saves 30 meg, bringing the game down to a more reasonable 106 meg. Number 9 is another obscure first-party game, Nintendo Puzzle Collection. This is a Japan-only collection of 3 games, Dr. Mario, Panel de Pon, and Yoshi's Cookie. The latter 2 of these are remakes of their SNES counterparts with modern graphics and music, plus some new features. Dr. Mario is just an emulated port of Dr. Mario 64, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. 64 is probably the best Dr. Mario even to this day, and it was originally exclusive to North America, so this was the first time Japan got it. This collection also includes smaller versions of each game that can be transferred to a GBA. It originally takes up around 140 meg, but there's some unused content we can remove. First, some of the menu elements are copied in the form of a test folder. Removing that frees up around 8 meg. Second, the entire Yoshi's Cookie game is on here twice. The copy's file name seems to contain a date, indicating that it's an earlier build, but it's actually just the same file as the final game. Even so, that only saves another 20 meg, so the final size is around 109 meg. For what it's worth, Panel de Pon is by far the biggest game in this collection, taking up around half the space, but I'd also argue it's the most significant. For our next game, let's bend the rules a little. I already said no unofficial emulators or ROM collections, but anything officially released on the Gamecube is fair game, including emulators. So the ideal candidate for smaller cartridge-based games is The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition. This is a collection of 4 Zelda games on one disc, Zelda 1 and 2 on NES, and Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on N64. There are also some other bonuses like a demo of Wind Waker and a series retrospective video. But the most interesting thing about this collection is that it's structured like a demo disc, and each game is its own standalone executable. So instead of adding the full collector's edition, we can extract each game and add them individually. And since they're emulated, they don't take up much space. Zelda 1 and 2 are less than 2 meg each, Majora's Mask is 56 meg, and Ocarina of Time is 488 meg? That's not good. Apparently, the end credits sequence in this version is a video file that takes up around 450 meg. Maybe Nintendo had problems emulating the credits normally? Although Majora's Mask doesn't have that problem. I don't want to remove the credits, but it's the only reasonable way to add Ocarina, and doing that brings it down to around 39 meg. Getting one of the most important N64 games on here is a great bonus, though its inclusion probably makes Majora's Mask a lot less important. We'll keep Majora, but it just barely made the cut since we already have Ocarina, and I had to really dig to free up enough space for it. Next, we have another emulated game, Tower of Druaga. Tower of Druaga. This was only given away as a pre-order bonus for the Japanese version of Baten Kaitos, so it's definitely the most obscure entry on this list. And unlike the Zelda collection, this is as bare bones as it gets. The disc is literally just a ROM running in a Famicom emulator with no menus, bonus content, or anything else. It only takes up half a meg, making it the real smallest GameCube game, so we have to include it. Alright, we're at number 15 and we only have around 70 meg to spare. Actually, we still have to leave room for menu icons, screenshots, and the extra amount of space taken up when converting the individual contents into a packed ISO, so fitting anything else in will be a challenge. I want this to go out with a bang, so how about another compilation like the Zelda collection? The game I've chosen is probably the most iconic of the GameCube's surprisingly few compilations. Sonic Mega Collection. This contains emulated ports of every Sonic Genesis game plus Flicky and Rystar. It shouldn't take up much space, but the full game is actually around 990 meg. We'll have to get creative. First, there's a lot of unused content in the form of test videos and audio, so those can go. Second, there are the normal videos in the game's extras menu, like game openings and promotional videos, plus the opening video for the collection itself. All those have to go too. After that, there are the illustrations, manuals, and comics. The Extras menu has some of the first Archie Sonic comics as well as over 100 comic book covers. Unfortunately, if we want any chance of fitting this game into less than 70 meg, we have to get rid of all these images. In fact, the Extras and Manuals menus aren't even doing anything at this point, so get rid of the actual menus too. Same goes for the credits and the music that plays during the credits. I know it sounds extreme to get rid of all this, but trust me when I say that it's necessary. The only thing that's left completely untouched is the games menu, which is obviously the most important part. Well, there is one more thing. The history music, which plays in both the Extras and Options menus. The Options menu, aside from removing the credits, is left intact. I could have removed the music that plays in this menu, but I just can't bring myself to do it. To me, it's one of the most memorable parts of the entire collection. In the end, we get 12 Genesis games, including some of the best games on the entire system, for only 47 meg. And that could go even lower if we got rid of the music, but I think that would take too much away from the experience. It was bad enough having to get rid of the comics. At this point, we basically have no space left. Not counting things like menu icons and screenshots, we should have around 18 megabytes left. There are a few ways we can fill that space, but they're not very good. There are official emulated demos for a few GBA games, but I really don't think they're worth the trouble. There are also some things that can be transferred to a GBA, but they're all either redundant or just not worth it. So is that it? Nope. It turns out we have room for one last game. Pac-Man Versus was a bonus that came bundled with other games. It plays mostly the same as standard Pac-Man, except one player controls Pac-Man with a connected GBA and link cable, while everyone else controls the ghost on the TV with a limited field of view. Think of it like an early version of the Wii U gamepad. Unfortunately, this is the game's only mode, and it requires a GBA, a link cable, and at least 2 players. If you don't have all those, you can't even play. This game is already small at only 54 megabytes, but most of that is taken up by music, with the game itself being less than 10 meg. We can remove the stage music and keep everything else to bring the ISO down to just under 16 meg. Removing the music obviously makes the game less enjoyable, but it's still the best use of this space. And to be fair, the first area doesn't have music anyway, so it's not too out of place. Before looking at the final disc, let's talk about some honorable mentions. First, remember that this isn't supposed to be a best-of collection. It's supposed to fit as much good content as possible into the size of a Gamecube disc, using only official releases. That means a lot of otherwise important games didn't make the cut, and the most glaring omission would have to be Super Smash Bros. Melee. I know, this is probably the most important game on the entire system, and arguably my personal favorite, and it'd be a crime not to include it. But my original No Videos estimate had it at around 550 meg, so I figured that was too much if we wanted to include a large amount of games. But in hindsight, I probably could have made it work. After removing every video, I also removed the audio used in those videos and audio files that are either exclusive to the sound test or completely unused, which brought it down to around 510 meg. There's also around 80 meg of what a Melee modding guide describes as toy files, which are a combination of trophies and actual items. I'd be okay with removing the trophies, but the items need to stay. Since I don't know whether each file is a trophy or something else, and opening them in a hex editor didn't help, and I also don't know if I'd even be able to remove trophies without breaking everything, let's say the final game would probably take up anywhere between 440 and 520 meg. So if you wanted to remove Double Dash, Majora's Mask, and maybe some other small game and replace them with Melee, you could probably make that work. I just didn't realize some of these optimizations until late into making this video, and frankly, I just don't want to rework everything at this point. One specific game that I would have added but couldn't due to technical issues is Kirby Air Ride. When you remove the opening, tutorial, and bonus videos, the game only takes up 280 meg. That's about 120 meg less than Double Dash, meaning we'd also have room for another game. This would have been a great addition, especially since I like it more than Double Dash, but unfortunately Air Ride is one of the very few games that breaks when you try to shrink and remove content from it. I was eventually able to scrub it using a different program, but I couldn't figure out how to remove the videos without breaking the entire game. It's also important to remember that just because we can free up more space doesn't mean we should. Super Mario Sunshine can be brought down to a little over 300 meg, but would require us to remove all the videos. For a game that embeds cutscenes into the levels themselves, I think the videos are too important to remove, especially since it would still take up a lot of space. Streaming audio is an issue too. Games like Ikaruga and Mr. Driller Drill Land would be good, cheap additions, but their music is just too big. Since we have so little space to work with, I also looked into the GameCube's collection of older emulated games. Surprisingly, it doesn't actually have many of these, and more surprisingly, a lot of them would be too inefficient. For example, the Mega Man and Mega Man X collections aren't emulated. They're actually full recreations of each game that take up much more space than their original ROMs. So now that we've decided on what to add, let's put it all together in a single ISO. I made icons and screenshots for each game, which take up another 4.1 meg total, so here's the final result. I think it turned out pretty well. When we select a game, we'd normally get the control screen, but it's not here. That's not a bug though. This disc is so full that I didn't even have enough space to add control screens for every game. Also, I just didn't want to make them. Instead, each game has a single gray pixel stretched out to fit the entire screen. The only exception is the last game on the list, WarioWare, which has a special screen detailing how each game has been altered to save space. So let's start up a game. And it works. And you can see that the opening video is removed. There are a few technical issues which seem to be out of my control. Every game on the disc uses the same internal ID as whatever disc was originally booted. That means save files will use this new ID instead of the IDs used by each original game. In other words, you can save just fine, but the original version of a game and the demo disc version will each use a separate save file. Also, a few games seem to be programmed in such a way that they break on a real system if they don't use the expected ID. For this collection in particular, that only affects Luigi's Mansion, so if you play on a real system instead of Dolphin, Luigi's Mansion soft locks after the Nintendo logo. We can fix this by setting the disc ID to be the same as Luigi's Mansion, but if there are multiple games with this issue, that would only fix one of them. With all that being said, here's the final list. Mario Kart Double Dash, Luigi's Mansion, Animal Crossing, The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, Mario Party 4, WarioWare Inc. Mega Party Games, Crazy Taxi, Cubivore, Nintendo Puzzle Collection, The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition, Tower of Druaga, Sonic Mega Collection, and Pac-Man Vs. all on one single GameCube disc. Depending on how you split up the compilations, that's at least 13 games in one. The maximum size of a GameCube ISO is 1,425,760 kilobytes, or around 1,392 megabytes. And after it's been converted into an ISO, our disk takes up about 1,391 megabytes, less than 2 meg to spare. Now you can see why I was so strict with removing every little bit of unnecessary content. And to be fair, we could have cut even more corners to make room for something else, like removing the music in Sonic Mega Collection, or removing the opening video from the disc menu. But I feel like we're at the point where scraping up additional space, even if it's only a few megabytes, would start to bring down the overall collection. I wanted to make a single ISO with plenty of content and variety, and I think we pulled that off. Our one-disc collection has bestsellers and hidden gems, 3D games and 2D games, games that define the GameCube itself, and emulated classics. I think this is one of the most efficient uses of a GameCube disc that still feels mostly authentic, but if you think you can do better, post your ideas in the comments. For obvious reasons, I won't be releasing this ISO, but I'll put a link in the description to the GameCube demo disc tool so you can make your own disc using your own games. It also comes with GameCube ISO tool. If you want to shrink a full-size ISO to put on a demo disc, just follow these instructions. That's it for the video. I hope you liked it, maybe learned something, maybe leave a comment. I don't know if I'll make another video like this because, as it turns out, making videos actually takes a lot of time and effort, and things like gameplay footage, visual effects, and well-timed spoken dialogue recorded through a phone from someone with no voice acting experience don't appear out of thin air. Who knew? But I still want to see your ideas anyway. Thanks for watching.